Our final panel for today, Form Meets Function, Architecture and Aesthetics of Art Spaces. As we settle into our concluding session, we shift the scale of the city to design of spaces that shape these artistic experiences. Please join me in welcoming Director and Principal Architect, Five Cross Architects, Adil Dolakia. Principal Designer and Partner, Studio Opolis LLP, Rahul Gore. Architect, Urban Designer and Co-Founder, Plural, Urmi Kapadia. Partner at IFBI, Arjun Malik. Creative and Design Consultant, Elsie Nanji. And our moderator for the session today, co-founder Art Links Learning and member FICCI Arts and Culture Committee, Sadhana Rao.
Welcome to the last panel, but not the least, of this evening. I'm just going to take a few minutes to set the context, but before that, a warm welcome to all of you all, and welcome to the FICCI panel. You know, this debate, form meets function, architecture, aesthetics, it's an ongoing debate across eras. Every generation, the practitioners sort of stamp their identity, their design philosophy on all the cultural institutions of a particular era. A background score to this is, I just want to emphasize on the concept of the cultural continuum. There is a 1,000-year-old temple in Tanjore or Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu, the Brihadeshwara temple. The temple was constructed in the reign of Rajaraja Chola I, and the temple is Brihadeshwara. That means really big. As rulers, the Cholas had sort of developed a very sophisticated system of governance. In fact, they were the pioneers who had a centralized form of government as well as a local form of governance. Now, this translated completely into economic, military, and administrative prowess. The rulers were visionary, so this answers Sanjoy's question and the conundrum of the previous panels. The rulers were visionary to transfer the agrarian, please understand, Tanjore, Kaveri belt, harvest 3 times. So the agrarian surpluses were transported to art and culture. Brihadeshwar, keeping in sync with the visionary of the rulers, the Brihadeshwara temple came up as one of the largest complex, and this I'm talking in 1010 AD. The architectural features, the shikhara or the octagonal cupola, the Buddha, the bull which sort of guards the Shiva, and it's an ode to Shiva, Lord Shiva. All this has been crafted out of single piece of granite. There are engineering marvels, there are studies done on this. And temples in South India had 2 primary functions. One was worship. Not everybody in the family worships, maybe the head of the family. And the temples were the cultural bastions. Brihadeshwara followed this form and function. As time elapsed, it lost its primacy to its smaller cousin, the Meenakshi Madurai. However, in 1956, Archaeological Survey of India did a cleaning act of the temple and discovered 81 very exquisite carvings. Now, what were these carvings? These were positions and postures of Lord Shiva in a dance position, not necessarily only the Shiv Tandav that we know of. In classical Bharatanatyam or the dances of South India, you have about 108 positions, both still and transition. These exquisite carvings depict 81 of that 108 dance position taken from the Natya Shastra in 1010 AD. How did this flow into contemporary times? When this was discovered in 1956, I'll give you one example of a temple activity where it becomes a cultural space where culture, aesthetics, form, function, pluralism, and the various strands of culture all coalesce together in the Natyanjali, which is the Brihadeshwara's dance festival. People from all over come. Community throngs to this place. And what do they call in Tamil? They say, this is Veetu, it's our house. That represents the cultural continuum. Our panelists today in the contemporary context, following the same tradition, each one with a very diverse, varied expression, have left their signatures on edifices today, and that's what we discussed today. A big round of applause for our panelists. So just to sort of navigate the session compass, we'll have 3 rounds. And the first round, I'll ask you, each of you, to deliberate upon what is your thought process for the title, form, the function, aesthetics. What drives, what's the mojo? Should we start with you, Urmi?
I'll just take up from where you left in terms of traditionally. Art was extremely contextual. So post-industrial, post-colonial art is very different from, the definition of art is very different from what we used to perceive traditionally as art. So the entire aesthetics of architecture that houses art, earlier, it was one and the same, the art and architecture fused together. So whether it was in the temples or within the residences of people, the folk art or the cultural art that each place exhibited was part and parcel of the architecture itself. While now we debate theoretically about white box, black box architecture to house art, because the art is not always contextual. There are traveling exhibitions which go from place to place. Now, in today's day and age, again, the art is moving towards its context. The pluralistic art is now no longer limited to the white box, black box definition. We see a lot of art within the city, within the urban infrastructure itself. In Mumbai itself, we have art being exhibited in Sassoon Docks. So you'll use the existing infrastructure of the city and then produce art which is very contextual to that in a form of an event. So the forms of art are again diversifying very contextually in today's day and age. So when we talk about function and form of architecture that houses today's art, we have to now start looking at multiple forms of art. So I think that's where I will start from.
Okay, that's a good sort of documenting the journey, the change. Adil?
So to continue from where Urmi left, so I think the idea of art is a part of our daily life. And, in a city like Bombay, where, at every nook and corner, you will find something that is going to capsulate a user, be it from our built heritage to our intangible cultural heritage to, aspects of our daily materials that we consume. There's so much of inspiration. I think the function that, these architectural spaces are adapting to are secondary. What is important is, what is the narrative intangibly associated with the idea of the art itself first. I mean, in general, if we also look at, some of these artistic spaces, without people, what do they mean? There's no value to it. There's something that each individual artist or people bring to the table. But till the time it's not inhabited, the design and all is also, in a way, tertiary to it. So I think it's more about the stories that kickstart it than the latter, which is the architecture of it. And I think that would be the starting point of what is going to really make the form, the function, the architecture, and the aesthetic of these spaces. So identifying that story is very important, and it could or could not be associated with a person, but there has to be a strong grounding to it that needs to be identified. And if you identify that, I think naturally it's going to fill up the other boxes that one is trying to understand through this experimentation of designing, and what as us as panelists are trying to do through the practice.
So the walls must speak and they must hear.
Yes,
That's
and
the most fundamental point.
definitely.
Okay.
So, I mean, we won, we did completed the BR Museum, which was a competition. So I think, a competition project is always interesting because there are star architects who are participating, and it's an iconic building that most are trying to do. But I think what we have tried to approach all along is be true to it's actually not about the building, but it should be about the art. And that's the star, right? So the content is the star, and the building should become a backdrop. I think to me, that's important, that the museum stays silent, stays quiet, stays a collection of spaces. It gives opportunity for people to interact and interact with the art. I mean, at the BR Museum, we were very fortunate. They have a fantastic collection. Yeah, so they're when you have a collection like that, the star is already in place. And the challenge today is governments want to do museums, but what's going in that is a big question mark, right? Because there's no collection systems. There are it's just I mean, there's no brief. So the architects are asked to prepare the brief, which is kind of completely, So I think doing a museum is the easy part. Running it, getting the content in it is a real challenge. And that's where our, I mean, as a collective system, the government needs to put in their energies in preparing good briefs. I think there are so many RFPs that come out which have it just doesn't make sense. Everything wants to be big. Yeah, as an example, the Gujarat museums, which Ratan and me kind of won, I was just discussing with Arjun outside. The budgets are defined, and then they want everything to be larger than what's done before, right? So it reaches totally 6 lakh, 7 lakh square feet. And we had to really undergo an exercise thereafter where we tell them that, no, make it smaller, but don't reduce your budget, keep your budget there so that your per square foot goes up and you're able to do more justice to the building. So I think that's the education part of it. And I think the architecture, the spaces all then reflect in what we can produce and create as quality spaces as against creating generic spaces.
On a deeper note, I think the panel earlier alluded to loss of ego. And I wish they were listening to this. I have the privilege and the honor of sitting with panelists who are actually saying architecture should be a silent curator and should not be speaking. So I think one round of applause. Thank you for that. Elsie, your thoughts. Deep relationship with design.
One is I 100% agree with you, Adil, that the narrative is the most important part of it all. I think my 30 years in advertising taught me, we did so much research with, the person on the street, the person in a home, the person in Malabar Hill, all of that. So we got to understand what it is that those people aspire to and what they want, out of everyday life, what is happening around them, contextual relevance, all of that. And that experience and learning, I'm put straight away into interiors or whatever. Whoever the architect is, whoever the person is who I work with, I think the story is the most important thing. And in fact, in the Mahindra Museum, which is a tiny little museum compared to all of that, I'll tell you how it came into play, the narrative and the storytelling.
I think more than because I think a lot of what we talk about when we talk about spaces for art, we tend to talk about spaces that prioritize the dissemination or exhibition of the end result of a process, right? I think, yes, very often you will have something like a Mona Lisa or a Picasso, or in the case of, Bihar, a very strong collection around which you have to curate and build. So you have something fixed around which you move. But I think, and it doesn't apply just to museums and galleries. It applies to all public building archetypes, that the entire genre is changing to prioritize not just the dissemination, but creating sensitive spaces for the making, production, and to move more towards people and community. So irrespective today of whether you're talking about a design museum, an art museum, et cetera, whether it's a greenfield project or an appropriation of existing part of the city, it's all, I think, moving towards engaging with the community and engaging with the city. A case in point is there's a very, very prestigious competition that was just concluded for the Helsinki Architecture and Design Museum. And I went through all the winning entries, and I realized that the building that would traditionally be the least acceptable when you look at the kind of nostalgic form of a museum, of grandness and bigness and housing this amazing collection. This was the most un-museum-like building, and it won not because it was the best-looking building or the best program building. It's because it opened itself up to the city. It created a resource for the city, whether it be for creatives or people or food or events or anything of the sort. So I think the entire notion of, in a way, I won't say destigmatizing, but taking away that rarefied feel to art as something being, up there. As you mentioned, as Urmi mentioned, our culture is essentially all about art being a part of life. Historically, we would learn even in our old history books, the cultural evolution of society would only begin after its economic stabilization, right? But we don't draw those distinctions anymore. So I think whatever we do, yes, of course, it has to perform for a particular purpose, but I think also speculating about the very nature of a specialized space is, I think, the actual subject of engagement, especially in dense cities. You can't just chalk off a 10-acre parcel of land. Gujarat can do it. Bihar can do it. We don't have this. And the city would, if you're going to demolish something and create a parcel of land here, it's going to those who will not be named. So I think you have to really carve out spaces and engage in different ways to make this more accessible, I think.
So I think the form versus function, I think the golden mean is with storytelling at the heart of the community. Segueing into, let's take a deep dive. Adil, if I could bring you in. It's fascinating to read about your work. A disbanded Baroque castle in Germany, converted into a cultural hub. A rundown cattle good station in Cairo, made into a women's empowerment center. What you've done with the Hamilton Studio, to what you're doing in Khandala in terms of a disused cathedral. What is the mojo in picking up projects like this? And how do you layer it? How do you texture it? What's the story behind this?
So we've been privileged, I would say, to find partners and collaborators who understand the mandates that we've set at the practice. And of course, the idea was to identify potential intervention points to ensure that there is a benefit for the immediate community that resides around it. It could be any form of building that is there within, say, the diameter of whatever, a village, or historic Cairo, or say Bombay, or now Khandala, where we're starting our next work. The idea was that what is the impact it can create at a larger discourse? What is the quality of life that the user would get? What is the contribution at a socio-economic, ecological, economic, lenses, and how they're going to, come together under this one roof of the projects that we are undertaking. as the name of our practice also suggests that it's about the 5 domains, we try to identify that whether our projects fall under these 5 domains or not, which is say heritage, urbanism, architecture, and then of course we test it using art and culture. It gives us that possibility of really quantifying the projects that we take up, and that should have its own mandate. So when we really start off a project, we try to understand that what is it that it's going to have an impact on? What is the mandate? What is the idea? And it doesn't begin with design. It begins off with the logic that say the principles or the funders, or in some cases when we apply for grants themselves, we try to identify what is really the crux of that. To come into one of the projects, when at the Hamilton Studios, we did not start off thinking that what functionally that space could serve as, but we actually traced our steps really back 98 years to understand that how did it function
The
as a
photography.
photography studio. And of course, they've set the benchmark so high that you see any picture of the internet, you understand that is a Hamilton photo because of the style that they have. And a story that I've narrated earlier, but the idea was that when we started off that project, I did not understand myself that why is Hamilton put at that helm. And it was simple. I asked, Ajita, that you make a photo for me. And I went through that entire process of 45 minutes, taking that one single photograph and then meeting her, a day before, where she started talking about colors and, and to ensure that, there was, I was prepared for it. And there's a story that she narrates, and the idea was to identify that story. Same way in the abandoned cattle house where I was working with my mentor, the idea there again was that for whom is this space? It's in one of the bylanes of historic Cairo where there's a very strong community. It's called the lane of the weapons, as it literally would translate. And there was an economy associated to that. There was a strong community that stayed in that lane. And we started identifying that it could be any building. It's what is it going to house? And then same way now when in Khandala, where we start working on the adaptive reuse of this 200-year-old church, we're trying to identify that in the long run, what is it going to serve the purpose of? Because without people, place, and the practice, these three are the domains that we also try to check each of our projects in and understand that what is really going to be practiced within it. Who are the people who are actually going to use it? And what is that place known for? So through the mandates and through these three boxes, we try to quantify each of our work.
We'd love to read your planning book. I think from the morning we've been hearing about the Bihar Museum. I think almost in every panel. So, Rahul, tell us, it's a narrative-rich museum. The work that you're doing in Gujarat. You mentioned that that's at the seed stage. Seed is just, formed into a plan. Give us a sense of, like every state has directive principles of state policy. To take on a project like this, there would be some directive frameworks that you would need to work around. Etch that process for us?
Yeah, sure. I can try. Yeah, but I think any museum basically now we were talking of immersive experiences, and going ahead, all of them are becoming black boxes because any immersive experience needs that kind of a black box scenario. Even a little bit of sunlight coming in takes away from. So that's the sad part, right? I mean, we always dreamt of galleries with lights. We've seen Louis Kahn's Kimball with beautiful daylight coming in, but the reality is today, actually, daylight is not even the case of Bihar Museum, because of the historical objects and other things. They all are black boxes. So we are talking of a form and this thing for displaying stuff, but it's completely, you're taken aback, right? You have to deal with black boxes. So what happens then is the spaces in between become very important. And that's when you're going from one gallery to another. what's the nature of that space, how contemplative it is, and then how all these galleries can get service to ensure that these AV systems are working well, and these things become more important in the planning process. So I think in the Bihar case of the Bihar Museum, we worked with courtyards. I mean, the museum has 7 courtyards, and each courtyard is come about from the geometry of either the site, which is just a setback, or it's a design space. It's a square, it's a circle, it's oval, or it's just negative space coming around from what's coming around. But that gives each courtyard its own character, and I think that's also what makes that museum very Indian. Mr. Maki, with whom we worked very closely on this, he said there are lots of museums in the world, but he's not seen any museum with 7 courtyards. And I think that's what is the driving principle of planning that museum. When we come now to the Gujarat story, the question, it's a museum for the royal kingdoms of India. And every meeting, is it royal enough? Why is your building not looking royal enough, right? So that becomes a challenge. Why do you need your building to be royal? So like I said, the gallery should be the star. So, to me, those in-between spaces, the surroundings, those have to be calm, peaceful, to be able to, you enter galleries, you're being flashed with images, colors, everything possible. So it's other spaces that have to really calm you down, orient you. It has to work. It has to let you know what is happening where. And I think that's the focus that we are trying to do. And it's a constant challenge. Now, how do you make each museum intricate? It has to be separate. So I think context is a great thing. And if we can work with where it's located, what its site is, what its surrounding is, those give you the clue to make each museum unique. And I think those are the principles we follow as far as possible.
Just a follow-up question. How has the reaction been from the visitors, the people thronging to the museums? How have they reacted to this form of any circle back or any loop?
Yeah, of course. I think, I've visited the Bihar Museum several times, and the main interest is to see how people are reacting, right? That's at the end of the day, that's the high you get in life. If you've done something and you can see people reacting, and it's very interesting how people use spaces, how children use spaces, and how programming of the museums has become so important to get people to keep coming back. I think Bihar, it's fortunate that it's in Patna. It's in an urban context. The Gujarat museums are going to be a way out, so it's going to be a day event. But the Bihar Museum is something within the city, and we see families coming back. The children's program is so important in making sure they come back. You have to have a good restaurant. You have to have a multi-purpose hall, a temporary gallery. We spoke this morning in the earlier this thing of, we have 29 states, and each state has a museum. Each state has its own unique culture. If we have good temporary galleries at each of these museums that can keep rotating stuff, you've got a fantastic entire Indian, this thing can be, kind of shown. And I think what we are aiming is to build in this infrastructure where these temporary galleries can receive this thing, receive these exhibitions. They are to the highest standards, so they maintain quality for air, security, and other things. So if ever you go to have a Picasso collection coming to India, the BR Museum can house it confidently. Even insurance will cover it. So those are the standards if we build in, and if you have one in each state, I think we can have a fantastic collection.
You needed to have built in a hotel with it, by the way, because
well, when we started BR Museum, there were just 2, and now there are at least 20 hotels. So it's getting there. And actually, the BR Museum has been the stimulus at an urban level. What it has done, it regenerated the entire city around there. That's fantastic.
It's what you said in the morning, that we should have a course for finance and to teach. I'm saying there has to be a course for all this, because he made a very, very important point right now about light. Old museums, no natural light. If I could share the Bombay's flagship store of the Sabyasachi store, we were given a tour yesterday. It was interesting to see 2 generations, a mother and the daughter to be a bride. And the mother kept saying in chaste, Shuddh Hindi, Rang nahi dikh raha. Because it was like what he said, Sabyasachi store, architecturally, by interiors, has no windows. His design philosophy is you shut the world outside, you come into this world, and you choose. And the daughter, I mean, out of curiosity, I asked the daughter, how do you like it? I love it. I have no influence of my mother. She will tell me this color doesn't look nice in the light. I will look dark. I love Sabyasachi's philosophy. So it's a very important point. This kind of shift that is happening in the museum space, in the exhibition spaces, is something that needs to find its way into the educational curriculum. But Asad, conference for another day. Yeah? Elsie, you've had a very deep relationship with design in almost every form. All this sort of crystallizes in your museum, the Mahindra Museum of Living History. You know, storytelling, technology, design, core values, philosophy, just about every angle has come in. Give us your sense of that journey. How did it work?
Oh, sorry, yes. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Is it on? Yeah.
Yeah, we love to share. Community speak.
So firstly, I must say I'm very humbled in the presence of these people because they're all, architects and they've done, huge, wonderful things in like the Bihar Museum, the things you were talking about. I kind of stumbled in my profession from one into another. So first I was selling...
But you were brilliant in everything.
I stumbled into... So I tried to bring art and, a sense of aesthetic into whatever I did. And then I was lucky enough that while I was in advertising, I was asked, would you like to do my home, by Mr. Mahindra, and I was working with. Then next thing is, would you like to do a museum? And then would you like to do a children's park? And it is very exciting to stumble from one into another. But always I've had this yearning for making things more beautiful than they are. And always I have realized, as I said, from advertising, there is a storytelling context in everything I do. Even if it's an apartment, it is a story about the person, about what he values and he looks forward to. Maybe he just wants peace. Maybe he just wants a white room. I've done an entirely white room for somebody who is a big collector of art, biggest collector, a completely white room. So it really depends so much on the person and the people you're talking to. In the case of Mahindra, we didn't have a collection like you did in the Bihar school. We initiated the collection because we founded the principle on the Mahindra core values with their various industries. What are the values they wanted to impart into society, into the people, into everything? And they were beautiful values, honesty, diversity, so many of their core values. We interpreted it. We found appropriate artists of different mediums. So whether there was a textile artist, whether it was a filmmaker or whatever, different artists to tell that story. So if it is about integrity, it would be a simple artistic installation about that, And it was we even took modern things like the Batista, sliced it into many pieces, and that's an installation by itself, which is, when you go there, you feel like kind of energized, and young people love it, because we also got hold of the simulator, which they were using for their test driving, and put it into that, so anybody can sit in there, and we had the program, so you can drive to Monaco. People are queuing up, and it's 100 people a day. This is my best reward, I think. 100 people a day want to go to that tiny little museum, in Mahindra. So I think that for me was a lovely feeling of connecting to people of all ages.
Yeah, the human experience that you... Arjun, you have shared sort of revitalizing or changing a 145-year-old ice factory. Does the house know his restaurant? Yes. There. So I don't need to say it. Can someone shout it out? Huh? Yes. So I'm sure the journey was multi-layered, nuanced. There were enough speed breakers. There were enough milestones. Etch us the picture, if it's possible, in a...
Yeah, it's, look, I'll try and make it brief because it's. I think where it starts really is purely by coincidence. We, as practicing architects, my father and I, we're a little bit. I think he perhaps doesn't carry that burden. I have a little bit of guilt because it is supposed to be in a way a social profession, and I was acutely aware of, shall we say, the patrons that we were engaging with. Perhaps the physical results were of a certain quality, but we were always concerned about what about the city? What are we really doing? And I'd seen too many of my peers, too many of my heroes. I salute people like Ratan for, in a way, fighting the good fight continuously, always wanting to engage with city, with government, with bureaucracy, with political structures, or me, you as well, right? And I just didn't have the stomach for it. Whether I was overindulged or lazy, the reasons don't matter. And so when we stumbled upon this place, literally walking to Clearing House, it's part of the same complex, and we just walked into that courtyard completely destroyed. It was working as an ice factory until 2019. And they were planning on shutting down, moving their operations to New Bombay because it was just too expensive for them to maintain them in the center of the city. And so they wanted to start leasing spaces out. Look, for us, it ticked a couple of boxes. One, we didn't know what we wanted to do, so there was no question of IFB at the time. It didn't exist. One was the banyan tree. It was dying. It was choked. That needed to be released because our first love has always been nature. The second was to engage with history, because we've been watching from a distance. We have a highly, as a community of people, not just as not architects, but as a community of people, we have this highly polarized relationship with history. Either we put it on a pedestal, in which case you have to just, bow before it and not touch it, or you just crush it underfoot. We don't have an equitable engagement with our past. Now, what that has to do with centuries of occupation or whatever it is. So the ability to, or the desire to want to engage with history in a more equitable sense, to have an equal conversation with time, the banyan tree, and finally to just give back to the city in whichever way we can. I think these were the three things that really informed our decision to even step into that morass, and that's what it was. It was an absolute nightmare. As a cautionary tale, please do not do this unless you are heavily reinforced. Yeah, it's. Then we began thinking about what to do. Obviously, it had to be, and there's a very good reason it says architecture, design, and the arts, because as far as we're concerned, art and perhaps the arts still have a lot more representation in the city. Architecture and design don't. We don't have a house for architecture in the city or design. It's absurd, right? So the intent was to just create free space without program, without being overly prescriptive. It was a series of engagements with the PPT, with the BMC. COVID hit us in the middle. Our partners backed out, etc., etc. There were enough reasons to just walk away. But I think being able to get into that 140-year-old space, peel it away layer by layer to identify an essence, right? And that essence is not fixed, it's not objective, it's very, very interpretive. And that's why we would never touch, potentially, I would never touch if someone told me go and work with the Taj Mahal, I'm turning around and running away. I don't want to deal with it, because when you get to the idea of conservation or preservation, the way it is disseminated in our profession, it's about knowing the end point of the journey and trying to find or map your way to it. It has zero interest personally for me. I think interpretive preservation or speculative conservation, where you're able to dialogue with time, with a space, it'll mostly be utilitarian heritage, like he's talked about. I mean, with the church, it's very interesting because that's got immense symbolic value, right? But these don't have symbolic value. They have utilitarian value. They were built for a purpose. So when you can engage equally with these spaces, interpret them, and then I think the kind of journey is important because you don't know what the end result is, right? So there's a physical dimension to it. There is a programmatic dimension to it where at least I personally don't get involved too much unless there is something in particular that I feel needs representation. We have a wonderful, wonderful program director in Sarita Vijayan. And I told Dad as well, just keep your hands out of it, because if we start imposing, we can suggest values, right? We can be instructive in establishing a framework, but we stay very agnostic in terms of content. Now, we hit a bit of a problem because we had partners, and I think the economic aspect of it in terms of, robbing Peter to pay Paul, because that's the reality of it. And the question came up in the previous session that why aren't weddings culture, right? And our partners who were just looking at the money counters, wanting to host weddings and parties, and they didn't care who was throwing up where, just the money was coming in. And that's when Dad and I realized that we can't be as, hands-off and agnostic as we claim to be, because ultimately you are then, you do have an opinion, right, on what is culture and what isn't. And that's a very, very slippery slope to be on, right? Yeah, it is very subjective. So look, it's a physically, philosophically, environmentally, historically, I don't know how we went from practicing architecture to running a restaurant. I really don't know how we kind of wound up in that place. I always ask my father and my sister, like, this is really what we need to be doing. But anyway, it's an interesting set of conversations, and it's just our way of connecting back rather than doing the slow, heartbreaking engagement. We just went all out, dropped the hammer and said, let's just do it. And finally, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words.
That's a story for a book or a film. Urmi, segueing to another extreme, you have a very, you work at a very critical intersection point between city, community, and culture. The canvas again is, the arena is very exhaustive, right? What is the design focus on, or the philosophy when you're crafting multiple public spaces, creating communities which are vibrant, and more importantly, moving to the realm of how does architecture and aesthetics influence the community's behavior?
So,
Sorry, just the thought I was trying to allude was the dignity also of the person,
Yes.
the residents, the dignity of them in terms of life and living.
So what I'm going to do is bring art to the other extreme, because where I work in, we are not looking at dedicated spaces of art. So art in a lot of way, we understand art to be exclusive, whether we want to admit or not. It has an exclusive space of its own, where it does not include all the public, the entire demographics of our city. So if we think about, like Arjun had said earlier, if we think about what a museum would be like in a city like Bombay, does it need to be a black box? Does it need to be a white box? Or do you just want to disseminate it into and let the city take over? Because the kind of city that Mumbai is, it is all about the people and the infrastructure and the art created by people itself. So in our work, we use art in very different ways. We were working in Dharavi. That's where our journey started from. And in Dharavi, we realized that art does not happen after your economics, your daily economics are satisfied. Art happens also with people who are struggling with their everyday life, and beautiful artwork that happens within Dharavi. And we've also seen that, you know, art is also a medium of engaging people in giving them voice for what they want. So when we were working with Dharavi, reinventing Dharavi competition, we used art as a medium for people to express what they really want. What is the vision of Dharavi for them? And they came up with completely unimagined answers just because we used art as a medium tool. Not direct question answer, not a survey that usually an architect or, you know, urban planners use. But art being a tangential tool, a tangential medium, gives that platform, gives that space to different demographics to express themselves. In our practice, we've also seen that art becomes a tool to upgrade and dignify the surroundings. So we have seen in, say, Kala Ghoda Festival, the entire neighborhood, the entire district kind of got an upgrade purely from its identity as a cultural district, as an art district. Similarly, when Sasundok has that limited number of, you know, those days when the art exhibits are going on, suddenly that area gets a different vibe to it. So art can be used as a permanent tool, a permanent piece of urban infrastructure, which can upgrade everyday life for various communities. And that is also a way where it can break these barriers of a museum or of an art gallery and actually get onto the streets.
Sort of more fluid.
Yeah. So, and it'll be like, you know, observed art on the streets. People come and a hawker stall or something, you know, as nondescript as that can become an object of art in Mumbai. So how do you integrate that with your curated pieces, with your curated art in the museum? Is there a way to interweave that, you know, city as an exhibit and your art, which are patronized art within your museum as an exhibit? Is there a way to interweave both of these? And public spaces, in our entire endeavor, I think many architects over here who have been working with public spaces, it's a very different game in Mumbai. I think the earlier panel said that as long as you don't have to deal with government, you are better off and you are successful enough. So as soon as we talk about public space, whether we like it or not,
You have to deal with
the government comes into the picture. So the vision for a public space might be different, but what actually gets executed is something that is not at all in our hands, which is unfortunate. At this time, if there are more and more corporate CSR projects that come into being, and the public space, and especially the public art, which is taken further than just beautification and painting under the bridges, I think that we have really lowered the bar of public art in Mumbai. It is.
Most parts of the city.
Yeah, it is. I think we don't even know where to start from now. So it's, yeah.
You know, I mean, I agree to that, but I also agree to what you say, that when you're dealing with public spaces, you do have to deal with the government. And, you know, again, I'm just going to say something hopeful. I know I'm disagreeing with you, Sanjoy. Here I'm wearing my hat as a member of the Bangalore Literature Festival. We've been severely criticized because we run the festival, pay through our nose. The Bangalore Lit Fest has a very different model. It is friends of Bangalore get together, give an X amount of money. You have people like the Premjis and Kiran Mazumdar Shah who give, nobody can give upwards of 5 lakhs. So we have total freedom on the content. But people, historians like Ram Guha and all have criticized us that we are in a luxury hotel. So we've actually, this year, the festival moves to the iconic Freedom Park in Bangalore. It is difficult. You know, restrooms. It is difficult. But I think we have a team of 25 people. 3 people are curating and 25 are dealing with the government. So, but somewhere the step has to, you know, come in. Shantanu, how are we doing on time?
Santa, just to pivot to that is, you know, at the end of the day, you said public spaces and therefore government. public spaces is us. We have to, like Rahul said, educate government
I
to
agree.
be able to get them to understand that it's not them, it's us. And that's the fundamental change that we need to make. This is not us versus government or, oh please, hame de do.
For instance, I can't quote the name of the person, but there's a person in Mumbai who just told us yesterday, why does State Bank of India, I forget which central district, the huge office of State Bank of India, they should move out, do banking in Powai or somewhere, and leave this place for art. Is a comment said by somebody who is vested in the Mumbai ecosystem. So, yeah, Sanjoy. So you'll go and tell State Bank to move out.
I do it all the time. State Bank should go to wherever Seychelles or wherever they disperse their money to.
Shantanu, how are we doing on time? So I thought if we open it, I'm sure the audience would like to relate to the panelists, and then just give me time to circle back for closing comments. Yeah? Okay. So we open for Q&A. Please direct your question to one of the panelists.
It is really heartening to have the IFB space and the use of the tree. That is a function of including nature, which is so vital to the city. It's almost the lung, the oxygen to our city. That's wonderful. And I'm so happy to see finally Bihar Biennale on the panel. Now, considering we have 6 months of monsoon in Mumbai, spaces are going to be very different from what we imagine them. Like, I can imagine a monsoon during start at Sassoon Dock and all of us going right there, plowing through water and all of that. Museum on a boat, yeah. So, yes, thank you for that IFB, which I think is also the future of how we imagine and reimagine spaces. And Elsie, it's really an honor to know that, we have living museums like that. I've seen Stuttgart, I've seen BMW Museum. And I'm when Anand Mahindra had come, I was one of the first corporate communication people there at Mahindra. So yes, that is what we need, different kinds of museums. So museums need not be what we thought they were. And I read somewhere there was like 53 to 58 museums. I don't know whether they were ice cream museums or shoe museums or whatever. But whatever it is, that is heartening. So this was not a question because I did not plan for this, but it was just a comment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Since no one is asking a question, even I'm making a comment. I walked in on the inauguration day and I saw the tree and I saw Gauri's daughter performing out there. I said, I have to program there, and I pursued them, and I've done many, many programs there.
A wedding?
No wedding. But nothing wrong with weddings. Honestly, it brings in revenue. It gives you the money. Even in the last panel, I was going to say, at the Opera House, if someone wants to do a wedding, then please do it. You charge people and I have money to pay the artist. It really is, you have to balance it. You can't be such a purist and say, I can't do weddings here. What's wrong with weddings? It's a big part of the creative economy. Sandra will tell you about that.
Maybe we can learn from the government, mandate, don't do this, don't do that.
One venue I've just seen lately, actually in this summer, is the V&A East. I don't know how many of you all have seen it, but that's actually a very interesting way of taking a museum or an art space and deconstructing it in a way where you are seeing the archive, you're seeing the warehouse, you're seeing this, and you're actually interacting with the space in different ways. You talk about public participation. If you want to talk, by the way, I love the Bihar Museum. I've done talks with you guys on architecture, on the food, on curation, now nothing else is left, but now maybe Bihar Museum 2.0, besides that tunnel, which I hope is not done.
A little while ago, Sanjoy was telling me that there's a budget of about 77,000 crores for museums in India.
Last year's
New museum.
spend by state and central government was 77,000 crores.
So that's like $10 billion. Now, as practitioners, building spaces, etc. I'll take another analogy like earlier I said. If I look at all the software parks that have come up, total money that's gone in is about 100 billion. Actually, if museums are already at 10, that's pretty significant if you ask me.
177,000 crores.
It's like 10 billion almost.
Yeah.
10 billion.
Billion, yeah.
My point is that all of the space, we have about 1 billion square feet housing these 6 million people. They spent about 100 billion. Okay, glass and granite. But most people are very happy. They're in air-conditioned rooms and etc. But if it's already 10 billion, that means we do have taxpayers' money
Of course, there's
to
lots of
allocate.
Money. Money is not
right?
never the problem.
No. I want to understand whether your perspective on building spaces can accelerate in your minds as a community of architects. Like you were saying, I didn't want to become that, but is there a collective approach that, let's say, 1,000 architects have? Because you can actually knock on the doors then, and then choose the spaces you want to transform. Yeah, I mean, because how can you map 50 cities of India and shift the gears?
We have a 100 people group and we can't agree on
That's okay. We disagree.
Look, that's a very, it's a very relevant point, but it's also very loaded for a couple of reasons, whether it's, 77,000 crores or 10 trillion crores or whatever it is. As far as our community goes, we've cannibalized ourselves. So we have a Council of Architecture, we have an Indian Institute of Architects, but we cannot even protect ourselves and reach any sort of consensus. So there's no question of, it's very difficult. I mean, the Bandra Collective, for example, or the Mumbai Architects Collective, there's, in Kerala, there are a couple of cities, but there's a community of architects. Bangalore seems to be a bit, Calicut especially. But we are only kind of touching it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of building any sort of collective ethos or momentum. So for us to go and lecture anyone on anything, it's a little bit preemptive right now. It's still very, very individual, right? And until we are able to plug any aspect of culture, whether it's design or music or cinema or the arts, right? It's very similar to sports. There's a very good reason we don't produce a certain level of high-performing athletes in this country. It's the same to do with culture. Until we can get to the grassroots level through education, through convincing, wiping out the conservative narratives, making any art form a sustainable way of living and not some, this sense of the pained, creative of, having to suffer, right? Unless you can provide it as a sustainable way to a better life, it's never really going to work because those software parks are an accepted way of getting to a better life. It has an aspirational quality. Until culture hits that level, we're never going to be able to mobilize it at a large scale.
I'll just talk on this, the 77,000 crores. I think as a responsibility to make sure that that money gets spent well. It's going to be there, okay? To get spent is the real challenge. I take the case of the BR Museum because there's a template which was successful. It was done by a government. They set up systems, did a competition, and followed it through. We've done several thereafter, only to see the very people who set it up turn around and lose confidence, right? So I think it requires conviction. It needs leadership, and that's where if there are more opportunities like this, I think the architectural community will respond. So there have to be sufficient opportunities. That 77,000 crores has to get spent well, and that has to come from the top.
So I have a question. In 2 months, in 2 months, you had ID design. We had AD. It started yesterday. I went because I wouldn't have time otherwise. And then next week is Mumbai Design Week, or what's it called? Design Mumbai, whatever it's called. When you go in there, you could be in Miami, you could be in Mumbai or Milan. It all looks the same. So what are we saying about the aesthetic of arts, where everything you're trying to put? I'd love to go see, some projects you all guys are working on in there. I went yesterday only to see the Jeffrey Baba because I'm quite obsessed by that. But I didn't get anything from them. Mm-hmm. So why are we trying to ape the West or be something global when we have so much to show for? Anybody?
So I think all these are very market driven and they will continue being there because the market is going to demand it.
There are underlying aspects where they say it's not.
Right.
I mean, I'm not calling
True.
out anyone. It's lovely. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go, you see art, you see furniture, you see design.
Correct.
It's nice. You see some tiles that you may want to put in your house.
No, so I think it's absolutely if these ones will continue being there and they are there and they're going to increase because the market demands it is what it's responding, right?
Okay, any more questions? So we can circle back. I just want some closing comments from the panelists. And, how does so maybe start with you. How does the future of cultural spaces look? Digital, hybrid, sensory, immersive. There is a movement, good or bad, that has started. How do you see? Just train your future lenses.
Looking at the space that I work in, I feel that until there is some form of aesthetics, the conversation on aesthetics coming into the beyond just a building, on your everyday life, on your urban infrastructure, on your cities itself, there are no conversations about aesthetics in our government rule books or daily, even the buildings that we see. So these conversations of aesthetics, only those will then create a future for art and aesthetics in architecture. So these everyday aesthetic conversations are very important and they have to be incorporated into the policy. There are certain states in India which are doing it, and I hope that is what continues further.
Orissa for one.
Even Kerala design policy,
Kerala,
hopefully
yeah.
it'll come.
Adil?
I think on the flip side, it's just starting because India's been late in opening up these abandoned structures which are adaptively reused with newer functions or functions that are the need of the hour. I think what is going to happen and which is starting right now is that privately people are opening up their properties to add that cultural value to the society and the community at large. On the other side, what we were discussing about these aesthetic exhibitions and all, they're going to happen at one level, and then intimately somewhere underground there are these private properties that are going to start transforming them into cultural centers for tax purposes otherwise, but I think they're going to be very value additive. And a 1 out of 10 is what is going to really drive value for projects or spaces like these that are going to have high impact. And that impact is at, of course, the artist level, but also at an integrity level. Because at the overall stance, I feel that we're not being very authentic to, the authentic or integrity enough to deal with spaces. And that entire transformation is kind of just ahead of us. And I think that's the starting point.
Great.
I think I already said, but I think all the architectural community will respond with whatever spaces they're going to do. Let's just make sure we spend that money well. I think that's important. Responsibility.
And accountability.
And accountability, that's it.
Elsie?
I think that already our city is looking so beautiful. I mean, I'm amazed at our own city when I drive by on these coastal roads, it just looks so glamorous. It is like we are living in some other land, these curving highways and everything. I really feel that, there is a tomorrow. There are young people who are doing incredible things. I go every year to the to student leaving, sessions and see their work and see what ideas they come out with. I mean, even a museum can be a recruitment space. You go in, you discover what you want to do. Do you want to be a physicist? Do you want to be a mathematician? Do you want to be an artist? You can make that into museum space. Anything is possible. And I think young people are absolutely brilliant today. However they've become that way, I don't know. But I really think I look forward to, what's coming tomorrow.
Arjun?
Look, I think in terms of engaging with the powers that be to have some sort of tangible, enforceable, sensible policy, like with everything else, whether it, you have education, but I think for culture as well, there needs to be a system in place to help the propagation. Otherwise, all you're doing is you're only relying on outliers or some private patronage or everyone you can't keep fighting against the tide. That's not how That's not how culture is built. It's not how civilizations evolve. You need to have, even in more developed countries that really prioritize their culture, you'll have a balance of state-sponsored culture and then private endowments and foundations, etc. Here, I mean, look, I know it's a cynical view, but you mentioned that people open up spaces. The point is, there are very, very few people who would open up the space for any sort of engagement if they had a better alternative. Even the ice factory, for example, if the landlord could have demolished the building and made something and monetized it, he would have done it. It's just the narrow lanes in that situation didn't allow them to do it. So he had no choice but to work with this, right? It cannot always be on the margins. It cannot always be a fight. It cannot always be, there needs to be a policy making. If there is 77,000 crores, surely someone can frame a policy as to how, okay, it's not going to work on day one. There are always going to be rascals involved because it's too much money, right? But at least some tangible policy on defining spaces within the city. I find it absurd that land use plans are constantly changing. I mean, if something is designated for education or institution or healthcare, I mean, it's just everything is turning into the highest bidder. And I know you said the magic words, coastal road. It's a very, very sore point, and I was in a client's house today at Worli, overlooking the coastal road from a distance, and I was just thinking back to my my dinky car collection, and the little ramp you used to throw them around. That's what it looked like in the distance, and it got me there really fast. But I don't know what it's going to do to those beautiful public reclaimed spaces. We have enough models to follow. Okay, if you can't look up to fully developed countries, you can still look at developing countries. You can look at, I think, Colombia. It's amazing what they're doing with culture within the city. So all the pointers are there, as Rahul said. We're all there, provided it doesn't become a constant uphill climb. After a while, you just get cynical. You get jaded. You're like, enough. You don't want to do it anymore. Right? He's been through it. He's been through it with Bhaudaji Lad. He's been through it with, in a way, Amravati. You look at what happened with with the Delhi, the Humayun's tomb competition. There's just all kinds of skullduggery. There's a beautiful Chipperfield museum. It's supposed to be the Mughal museum. Now it's being turned into some Chhatrapati Shivaji museum. I mean, all of these are being appropriated as symbols, and every good gesture is just being taken and weaponized for something completely extraneous to the people and to the public and to daily life.
In conclusion, I agree. In conclusion, I think looking for surety, looking for patterns in the cultural, artistic areas is looking for assurance on choppy seas. So I agree to that. But I do, as a cultural practitioner, I do conclude with a voice of hope. I do say that the magic of the arts is the triumph in the unexpected place. And that unexpected place comes with effort, sustained effort, and more sustained effort. I'd like to just take a moment to thank the wonderful AVID team. Please take a bow. Their leader or tormentor, Asad, Sagar, Dhwani, Aisha, thank you for indulging us. Thank you for giving us your space, Mrs. Ruya. And thank you so much for hosting us, for creating this dialogue. And now we have to write the report to see that these voices are heard. Thank you. It's been an honor moderating this panel with all of you all.